is Rachel, and today we're trying something new. So I've decided to try to do a reading guide every month that's going to have some things that might help you with your reading month. So I decided to do this a little bit late, so we're doing January's basically mid to late January, but February's will come earlier in the month. So without further ado, let's jump into January's reading guide. So first up are the reading challenges that are year-long, so we're going to cover the January topic. So the first one is the one that I'm hosting for the Golden Girls Readathon, and that is the Golden Girls year-long reading challenge. And the challenge for January is to read a book with a city or a country in the title, something like that. So I've got several recommendations for you. I've picked 4 that I've read and highly recommend. I will tell you now that I'm going to be reading Mexican Gothic, and that's going to be a recommendation coming up for a later challenge, so keep that in mind. But the 4 that I'd recommend for you for the Golden Girls Reading Challenge for location this month, the first one is All 13, The Incredible Cave Rescue of the Thai Boy Soccer Team. This is by Christina Schontornvat, and this was fantastic. I read this last year when I was a judge for the Sybil's Awards. I was on the nonfiction group, and this book just blew me away. It's about exactly what it sounds like. It's about the cave rescue of the Thai Boy soccer team. They were taking a break that day and just going on a hiking trip, and they went in a cave, and their flood weather came a lot earlier than what they were expecting, and while they were in the cave became flooded, and then people had to go in and rescue them. Sadly, one rescuer did die during the rescue, but all of the boys' soccer team made it out alive. It was insane to read what all they had to do to get those boys out, but it's really awesome to know that they do survive, because it gets really nerve-wracking while you're reading it. This is an upper elementary, middle grade nonfiction book, so it is not hard to read, but it is so fascinating. So this would be a perfect pick. Another fantastic pick for this challenge would be Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. This is kind of a memoir and essays about his childhood growing up during apartheid and in all kinds of conditions in South Africa, and then moving here, and you hear a lot of stories about his family. And while, of course, he's a comedian and has the ability to make these stories sound very funny, they're also very, I don't know, touching, I guess is the word. Scary, maybe, because I just cannot imagine that this man is roughly the same age that I am, and I can't imagine some of these things happening during my lifetime. So this was a very enlightening read. It was a very fun read, and it was very interesting, and I just felt like I learned a lot while also being entertained. So I would highly recommend Born a Crime. Another one that I would recommend, I haven't read this in forever, but I read it in high school and I absolutely loved it, even though I did not think I was going to like it at the onset, and that is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. I'm hoping to read more Dumas this year, possibly even do a reread of this either this year or next year, but this would be another fantastic one. It essentially follows a man who was wrongfully imprisoned. He spends that time in prison plotting revenge, and then when he gets out, of course, he goes on a revenge streak, and it is just so fantastic. I thought it was very fast-paced. I thought it was very interesting, and it kept my attention. So if you're looking for some sort of classic to read for this challenge, this would absolutely be fantastic. And my last recommendation for this challenge would be a YA nonfiction book that we read with my high school book club, and we loved it. It was The Family Romanov, Murder, Rebellion, and the Fall of Imperial Russia by Candace Fleming, and this was very fascinating. If you've ever watched the Disney show about Anastasia, this is her real life story, and we follow this last Russian imperial family in the fall of their royal family there, and we get to see a lot of perspective from what it was like to live as just a regular person in Russia at the time. We get to see the rising tensions and really the downfall of this ruling family, and it's sad because you know what's coming, but it's also fascinating because I did not know how it came about, so I would highly recommend this one. Fantastic, and that's The Family Romanov. Now, another reading challenge that's happening year-long is the Buzzword Readathon. This month's challenge is to read a book with the W words in it, so what, when, where, why, and who. When, where, why, and who. So I have some recommendations for you. I've read most of these. The first one I'm recommending is the Who Was series. This is by various authors, but it's a series that comes out fairly often. It's an elementary biography series, and these are just fantastic. They're easily identified by the characters on the front with the giant bobbleheads, and my students love these. I've read, I think, a couple, and they're really easy to get into biographies. They give you enough information so that you feel like you know a lot about this person, but obviously it's not too in-depth because these are written for children. But there's one on who is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is Dolly Parton, who were the Navajo Code Talkers, who is Elton John, who is Steve Irwin. There's a ton across a range of characters. There's a very diverse listing now. They're getting more and more diverse representation in the series, and I think it's just fantastic. This series has really gotten young readers into reading biographies, so just for that, it's an amazing series. I would also recommend What Kind of Woman by Kate Baer. This is a poetry collection, and I've just fallen in love with Kate Baer's poetry that she just produces on Instagram, so I was really excited last year to get my hands on a poetry collection that she wrote. And I think that I always struggle with poetry because it seems just so literary, and my brain just doesn't work like that, I guess. I don't understand why I should like what I'm reading when I read poems, but I felt like these poems were all very relatable, and I did enjoy reading this collection. I think this would be perfect for this challenge. And another one that you could read is When Dimple Met Rishi. This one is fantastic. This is about an arranged marriage where one of the people in this supposed arranged marriage does not know what's coming, and of course it's kind of like this crazy meet cute, and yeah, it's just a really, really adorable YA contemporary romance. A book that I have heard of that I think that would be very interesting but I have not read is She Who Became the Sun. This is supposed to be kind of a loosely based Mulan retelling, and from what I've heard, it's just absolutely fantastic, and this is officially going to be an ongoing series, so I think this could be a very interesting one to read. I've heard nothing but good things, and I've seen this cover everywhere, so that would definitely work. And another one that I haven't managed to get to that I really want to read is The Girl Who Drank the Moon, and this was a Newbery Award winner several years back, so it has to be fantastic. And I believe this is a middle grade fantasy story about a community who believes an evil witch lives in the woods nearby, and they decide that they have to sacrifice a child every year to this witch in order to keep her at bay. And we follow a character who is, as a child, set out in the woods as a sacrifice to this witch, and then the witch ends up raising this child, and it just sounds fantastic, and I just haven't managed to get to it. So all of those would be fantastic for the Buzzword Readathon this month. And I'm also going to be participating in the Read Harder Challenge this year. There are 24 challenges in total, and you can read them in whatever order, so I'm just going to throw in 2 challenges every month that I do the series to get you through to the end of the year. So the very first challenge is to read a literary biography about an author you admire. I struggled with this because I felt like I couldn't get both. I could find some literary memoirs that sounded really interesting to me, but I wouldn't go so far as to say I admire the person it's about. And I feel like a lot of the people I do admire, I did not think that their biography sounded that interesting. Like Jane Austen's the first one that came to mind. I love Pride and Prejudice, but her biography I feel like would be really slow paced. So I found a few that could work, and I thought I would share them with you. So first up is Shirley Jackson's story called A Rather Haunted Life. I think this could be very interesting. I have kind of mixed feelings with Shirley Jackson. I really love the short story The Lottery, but I also did not like The Haunting of Hill House. So I don't know about her writing, but I do think that she has a very well-respected place in literature, and I think that her biography sounds like it could be really, really interesting. Also, one that I'm likely to read for this challenge is Romantic Outlaws. This is about Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein, and her mother, who actually was very much a feminist fighting for women's rights and equality. And I think the idea of writing a biography about the two of them is just fantastic. And how can you not like Mary Shelley? I mean, I'm okay with Frankenstein, but the fact that she basically created science fiction is just outstanding. So that's one that could work. As well as Furious Hours. This follows all the research that Harper Lee did to find her own true crime story, a lot like her friend Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Long story short, though, she did end up publishing this work. She abandoned the project, and this follows all of the background and the writing process of Harper Lee during this time. Another one that I thought sounded kind of interesting, this is one of the first nonfiction books that I've seen about this author's life, and that is Agatha Christie's Secret Notebooks. I've seen several novels about Agatha Christie, especially during that missing time that she had, but this is the first one I've seen that would be a lot more specifically about her in a nonfiction capacity. So that could be very interesting. I mean, how can you not respect Agatha Christie? And she basically invented the cozy fiction genre. And then last but not least, I have Girl Sleuth. This is about the story of how Nancy Drew came to be. I had no idea that Caroline Keene was not one person that was actually in existence. She was actually two people combined together who wrote for Nancy Drew. So I just already think that sounds very, very interesting. So those are some options for your literary biography. The second challenge I wanted to mention for Book Riot for this month is books set in a bookstore. And I thought this would be super easy, but it turns out all the books that I've read are set in libraries and not bookstores. So none of these I've read. I haven't read any of these, but these are the ones that I thought I would recommend because these are the ones that sound really interesting to me. First up is The Sentence by Louise Endrich. I've heard so many good things about this, and it essentially follows a character who, after she's released from incarceration, ends up working at a bookstore and seems to be haunted by a patron that has just recently passed. And obviously this takes place in a bookstore, and in a weird kind of twist, Louise Endrich owns a bookstore, and in the novel, she owns a bookstore that this woman comes to work at. So I just thought that in and of itself sounds really fun. So that would be a good one. Also, The Little Paris Bookshop by Nina George. This is one that I know my mom has read and really, really loved, and it features a floating bookstore that goes down the Seine River, and I just think that sounds really interesting, as well as Midnight at the Bright Ideas bookstore. This is kind of a murder mystery set in a bookstore, so that sounds like it could be fascinating as well. So that should cover you on the reading challenges. Let's talk about some book clubs. So in January, first of all, my book club is going to be reading Mexican Gothic, so I'm going to be using that for my Golden Girls challenge as well. And then there is a true crime book club that is going to be reading The Science of Serial Killers, which sounds fantastic. It's got several infamous serial killers listed in the subtitle, so I think that's going to be really interesting, especially looking from a scientific perspective at serial killers, so that should be fantastic. The Cozy Mystery Club here on YouTube is going to be reading And Then There Were Crumbs. I don't know anything about any cozy mystery that I pick up, but I love a good pun in the title, and I've really been enjoying cozy mysteries lately, so this is one I may try to pick up. There's also another book club that I've kind of had my eye on, and that's the Stacks of Strange book club, and this month they're going to be reading A History of Wild Places. This is a book that I actually got for Book of the Month, and it is about this woman who goes missing, and then a man who is a well-known tracker who can find missing people very easily, goes out to look for her in this strange woods she's disappeared into, and then he goes missing. So it just sounds very, very interesting, and I would love to get that read this month if I have the time. And then I'm also going to be joining this year a read-along, so it's kind of like a book club. It's called the Out of the Coffin book club, and they're going to be reading all of the books in the Sookie Stackhouse series this year. One a month, except for June. I think they're going to read 2. So this month, They're reading Dead Until Dark. And if you have ever heard of True Blood, this is basically the book series that they base the show on. So essentially we're reading True Blood. So those are some of the book clubs. I will leave all the information about these book clubs and the reading challenges linked down below if you want to join in on any of these this year. And then I wanted to throw in a few new releases in January that you might be interested in reading soon. First up is Where the Drowned Girls Go. This is the newest book in the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire. This one I thought was pretty interesting, especially because we saw an institute on the opposite side. So far we've only been exposed to Eleanor's school, and these all feature children who desperately want to get back to the world they have discovered through their portal. And it's teaching them to try to be happy while they're waiting for their door to open. But this new institution is trying to completely erase all of their memory of their world, either because it was a horrible experience or just because they've come to the school and the school does not think that these portals are good for anybody. So it's a very interesting switch here, and we get to see some of the characters that we've seen along the way who've ended up in the school. So it was a really interesting addition. Another one is Wahala by Nikki May. I think this cover is absolutely beautiful, and I've heard this is very interesting. This follows a group of Nigerian women living in England, I believe, who are all friends. I've heard comparisons to Sex and the City, but I think it's just in the setup that you have 4 kind of fabulous women who meet up sometimes, and then you follow them through their own lives. So it's very much just a contemporary story about the lives of these women. Another one is Daughter of the Moon Goddess. This is a story about the myth of the moon goddess in Chinese mythology, and I've heard it's fantastic. So this will be the first in a new fantasy series. And there's also The Overnight Guest that looks really interesting. I've seen this cover over and over and over again, and this follows a novelist who has kind of sequestered herself to write, and she gets snowed in, and I'm sure some creepy things happen. And lastly is The Storyteller. This one is about a girl who comes across some journals and believes that her aunt, maybe her great aunt, was Princess Anastasia from Russia. And then the rest of the book is her discovering if it's true or not. So all of those sound fantastic. All of them are coming out sometime in January. And yeah, I'm hoping to get to a few of those this month. And finally, some odds and ends for you. First of all is Betty White's birthday. That's coming up on January 17th. We're having the readathon that weekend in her honor, the Golden Girls Betty White Out Weekend. And it would have been her 100th birthday. So definitely keep that in mind. Maybe read a book about Betty White. If you can, possibly donate to an animal shelter or a zoo, as Betty White was a famous lover of animals. And also, we have the 209th anniversary of the publication of Pride and Prejudice coming up on January 28th. It was originally published in 1813, so I'm planning on spending that day and that weekend rereading Pride and Prejudice, maybe watching Pride and Prejudice, and possibly reading a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, just to kind of celebrate, because that is by far my favorite book. So there you have some of my tips for January reading. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you very soon with the February edition so that it's not happening in the middle of the month. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again in another video soon. Bye!